black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I would like to welcome you to this current rendition of the show. For those of you who might be new to the Umoja Circle, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. Today's topic is going to be based on this book right here. It's a book written by a great scholar, W.E.B. DuBois. It's called Black Reconstruction in America. I want to start off by saying this before I get into the show and introduce you to W.E.B. DuBois. We've always had great scholars in the black community. Let us get this point straight. The problem with people who are surprised or don't seem to be surprised by some of these facts, one of the reasons we have Black Heritage Month every year is to wake people up to the truth of, without historical knowledge, you cannot really understand the present moment with things that are going on. You got to have a precedent. What came before? What led up to this moment? And one of the things that I want to introduce people to with this book is the fact that there was a moment in America, brief, trembling, and really uncertain, when the United States government actually dared to make amends to millions of people of African descent. Okay? Many of you might not know that. Some of you might not believe it, but it is true. There was a group of white men in the Congress who came out of the abolitionist movement of the early 1800s, from the Great Awakening, from spiritual awakening, who saw enslavement as a stain on their souls. And so there were white supporters, not saying they saw us as equals as black people, but they saw the system of enslavement as a terrible stain on the American body politics. And they were very instrumental during the Civil War, near the end of the Civil War, to make recompense once the 13th Amendment was passed based on them. You know, there were men like Thaddeus Stevens, who were white. You must read about this man. He had a black woman as his girlfriend. He would ride on his carriage with her, but he wanted to show that black and whites could work together. And he was one of the ones who pushed this Reconstruction, these laws that were intended to help blacks who were newly freed from enslavement, 246 years. Okay, and he was one of the men who dared to make amends to the millions of us that were enslaved. And this period of time, from 1865 to 1877, this 12-year, we now call the Reconstruction period. Many of you have heard of it. Many of you've heard many different variations of it. When I was growing up, I was told about it, but it was in a negative way, about the carpetbaggers and all this. This came out of those who were once the Confederacy, who dominated the dialogue and the narrative for the next 100 years after the Civil War. But we'll get to that later on in this topic. But there was a crossroads that happened during that period of time. One path pointed toward justice and a multiracial democracy, which lived up to that document called the Declaration of Independence, where, and the Constitution, which said all men are created equal, which changed the original intent of all white men was created equal to everybody, which includes the once enslaved people after the South was crushed after the Civil War. But But the other path was to go back to the old ways, okay? The old ways of being, the thing that led up to the Civil War and the destruction of, and the formation of the South, and that Southern ideology of white supremacy that still exists to this day, okay? Now, the Black Reconstruction, this book was W.E.B. Du Bois, 1935, he wrote this book that tells the story of that fleeting experiment in freedom and the ferocious white backlash that followed, okay? That white backlash still exists to this day. And the reason I say that, ever since 1877, which was the 12th year, when you had the compromise of Rutherford v. Hayes versus Lincoln, and we'll talk about that, in which those who were the liberals of the time just gave up on the black folks. Okay, they just basically betrayed them and took the troops out and gave us over to those ex-Confederates. That's the betrayal of 1877. From 1865 to 1877, there was an attempt to incorporate black people into the American system, but the crossroads they came to, they took that crossroads that started to take us back to what was before the Civil War, not where the radical Republicans were first attempting to point America in the proper direction where we were integrated into the system. There was this backlash, and that backlash continues until today. Ever since 1877, when there was black progress, there was always this white backlash, this white destruction of what was established by the black community. And you see the same thing. They want today in 2026 to get rid of the Civil Rights Act and all the Voting Rights Acts and the Fair Housing Act, the MAGA movement now trying to talk about critical race theory, to use that as an excuse to get black books like this out of the schools. This is a remnant of that started back from 1800s, post-Civil War. The South might have lost the battles on the fields of Gettysburg and all these other battlefields of the Civil War, but the psychological war of the Civil War still continues until today. So let's get started. Okay, who was W.E.B. Du Bois? Well, this is him. There's the younger version of him and the elegant older version of him. Let's go on to the next image. Let's start with his birth. Now, his name is pronounced W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois. Okay, he said it's Du Bois, not DuBois. It's Du Bois. And it's William Edward Burckhardt Du Bois. He was born on February 23rd, 1868 in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He died on August 27, 1963 in Accra, Ghana at the age of 95. He fought the good fight and had enough of the backlash, and he went back to Africa. And his grave, you could go to Ghana right now and see the house that he lived in and where he's buried to this very day. Okay, but he gave the good fight. Great man, and you got to know who he is. And you can see by the size of this book that he had a lot to say. Look how thick that book is. This is just about he was a sociologist, and he wrote this great book in 1935. We do have the knowledge. You just got to understand who we are as people of African descent. We don't have to depend on others to tell us the truth about our history. We have our great scholars like W.E.B. Du Bois. Let's go on to the next. His education and doctorate. Du Bois first earned a bachelor's degree from Fisk University, historically black university in Nashville in 1888. He then entered Harvard College as a junior and received a second bachelor's degree in 1890. This is a well-educated brother. He completed his PhD at Harvard University in 1895, becoming the first black American to earn a PhD from Harvard. His doctorate dissertation was titled "The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America, 1638 to 1870." So this was a well established brother. The second one who graduated with his PhD, you all might know, is Carter G. Woodson, who created the celebration of Black History Month. But this is the first person to get a doctorate degree at Harvard. He was a great sociologist, long before you might have understood that. So we had our great scholars. Let's go on to the next. Okay. His early career, in 1897, he began teaching at Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. At the turn of the century, published The Philadelphia Negro in Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. He also published The Soul of Black Folks in 1903. This is where you got the concept of the talented tenth, chapter 7, because I have that book too, of Soul of Black Folks. Okay, where he thought that at least a tenth of the black population who would go to these colleges and universities like Harvard, they would come back and teach the rest of our people. He was disillusioned by that. Okay. Also, Carter G. Woodson was disillusioned by that. The miseducation of the Negroes, that was not about the miseducation of the everyday black person. It was the miseducation of the talented 10, because they started taking on the persona of the dominant group who taught them, but they taught them from a white perspective. Okay. And Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois both realized this problem. Okay. He wrote about it in another book, but we're going to focus on this book right here. So let's go on to the next. Okay. He was one of the people, okay, he helped organize the first Pan-African conference, where he said that our diaspora, we're just not, those enslaving ships did not bring Trinidadians or Jamaicans or people from South Carolina or Louisiana. They brought Africans. So that we have this connection to each other in our diaspora, just like Jews who consider themselves Jews in Eastern Europe or in England or in France or in the United States, they don't see them as separate. They see themselves as one people, and we should start looking at ourselves as that. The power is in the many. We still having problems where we have people of African descent in America talking about people from the Caribbean who are denigrating African Americans. No, we were all brought over here on those ships from Western Africa. We are one people, even though we might have a Brazilian surname from being enslaved by the Portuguese, or an English surname or a Spanish surname. We are still Africans, and this is the Pan-African movement established by men like W.E.B. Du Bois. In 1905, he helped found the Niagara movement, Niagara Falls, Ontario, meeting on the U.S.-Canada border. In 1909, he co-founded that Niagara movement, went on to become part of the founding of the NAACP in New York City. In 1910 to 1934, he lived mainly in New York City, and he edited the Crisis magazine, which was the magazine of the NAACP. So he was one of the founding members of the NAACP, okay, along with some white people, because it was also white people who founded the NAACP, but he was one of the blacks who did that. Okay, let's go on to the next. Okay, some of his major works. In 1899, he wrote the Philadelphia Negro, a research in the Philadelphia publications in Philadelphia. In 1903, he wrote The Soul of Black Folks, a series of essays. And in 1935, he wrote this book, The Black Reconstruction in America. And in 1940, Dusk to Dawn, he published in New York City. And it was in Dusk Till Dawn where he started realizing that if we don't work together as black people, and he kind of got rid of the idea of the talented tenth, and he wrote about it in that book. But we're going to focus on his 1935 work, Black Reconstruction in America. Okay, let's go on to the next. In 1935, W.E.B. Du Bois published Black Reconstruction in America to challenge the dominant lie that black people were incapable of self-government. That came out of with the excuses that were used by the ex-Confederates who dominated the narratives after the Civil War, okay? They dominated the narrative. They started rewriting the history of the Civil War. If you look at many of those who were at the beginning of the Civil War, what they wrote and what they said, and then the destruction that ideology had to the South because of that white supremacy, like white supremacy today. Look what it's doing to us today to try to uphold that idea that a white man is more capable of running a government than black men and black women. The same kind of ideology that brought the Civil War but brought destruction to the South, but it started creeping back into the narratives to the latter part of the 1900s, basically until today, okay? But one of the great lies was that, when we had this 12-year period where black people were starting to give their rights and their freedom, is that we were incapable of managing things. That's the lie that came out of that period of time afterward. He traced 1860 to 1880 to show how a revolutionary moment of multiracial democracy was violently overthrown, creating the template for modern white supremacy and white nationalism that we are experiencing today. When you hear people talk about white nationalists or white supremacy in the dialogues today, it came from back then. This is nothing new, but you just don't know that history. That's why they're trying to get rid of, in the guise of critical race theory. Critical race theory is a theory that came out by a professor in Harvard named Professor Bell, but he wanted to show it had to deal with law school. If you were going to law school at Harvard, when you were in your second year at Harvard, you would get this idea of critical race theory that if you are a lawyer, you would also think about this history when it deals with black people, when you deal with laws, or if you go on to go into Congress or anything else, you want to take into consideration how black people were treated. That's what critical race theory is about. But the MAGA movement hijacked that idea and tried to claim that we're teaching this nonsense to grade school students. But they're using it as an excuse, just like back then, to get rid of black studies, to take books off shelves. That had nothing to do with what critical race theory was about. But that's what's being used. That white backlash, again, that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about in this book. He used those 12 years to show you that this is still going on today. Let's go on to the next image, okay? The crisis of slavery and secession, okay? From 1860 to 1861, this is the beginning of the Civil War. I'll just go over that for a little bit to show the foundation of why we had Reconstruction and the backlash that followed. Southern states seceded to protect slavery and create a slaveholding republic. That's the truth. A fact. Du Bois framed this as a clash between two labor systems, enslaved black labor in the South versus wage labor in the industrial capitals in the North. Okay, that's the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The war begins as a war to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. Lincoln said that. Lincoln and the Union leaders initially promised not to interfere with slavery. That's the truth. Let's go on to the next. These are what became known as the Confederacy, okay? These are the states in that orange tan colors that in 1860, 1861 seceded from the Union, and Lincoln and the North said no, and that initiated what was known as the Civil War. But the purpose of them seceding is they're saying was because of enslavement, because there was $1 billion system in modern money. Black gold was the color of the skin, and enslavement was the dominant resources for these southern states. So anybody who tell you it wasn't about slavery and they come up with all these other things, states' rights just mean the rights to keep people that look like me in bondage. That was the foundation, and that's the hidden secret that America does not, that contradicts the all men are created equal. How could you be all men are created equal when you have a system of enslaving a large portion of the population? Let's go on to the next. The general strike of enslaved people. People don't realize that black people were not this mindless, wandering. We had intelligence, but we were under conditions of enslavement. It doesn't mean that we were some kind of species of slaves. It's the condition. Okay, there's no species called prisoners. They're the people who are in prison. That's the condition they're in. These were still smart, intelligent people, our ancestors, who had their Africanness still part of their life style. DuBois' central insight said that enslaved people were not passive. They engaged in what he called a general strike against the slave system. Okay, they would do slowdowns. As Union armies advanced, enslaved people abandoned plantations, refused to work, fled to Union lines, bringing families and knowledge of Confederate positions to the Union force. We participated in that war any way we could. Let's get that straight. Let's go on to the next. This is the actual image of black people following Union troops. A lot of these armies in the South that fought in the Civil War in the Union Army had embedded in them reporters from places like Philadelphia, New York, and Massachusetts. They had cameras, and they had illustrators. And this is what it looked like when you had black people who, once these Union armies came through the South in Georgia and Alabama and places like that, in Virginia, they would just stop what they were doing, get what they can, and follow these armies. Okay, they went on strike with their feet. Of course, the paper that we call the Emancipation Proclamation didn't do anything on paper, but didn't stop our black ancestors from saying, well, we'll make sure that that paper works. We'll do it with our feet. Okay, the paper itself meant nothing. Here's another image, illustration in one of the many northern magazines showing black people leaving these plantations in the thousands, okay, which disrupted the economic system of the Confederacy because they depended on them for that labor. Let's go on to the next. This mass withdrawal of labor eventually involved hundreds of thousands, crippled the Confederate economy, and forced the Union to reckon with emancipation. You know, there was a written emancipation, but black people were coming across Union lines, following Union armies, and they had to deal with it, okay? What the Negro did was to wait, look, and listen. As soon as it became clear that the Union armies would not or could not return fugitive slaves, the slaves entered upon a general strike. This is historical fact. Let's go on to the next. From contraband to soldiers, okay? The Union commanders began accepting fugitive slaves as contrabands of war. See, they even would contraband what you do with material, okay? But these are human beings. Look at the terminology that was being used. They dehumanized black people. But we showed our humanity and how we responded and reacted to the indignity of enslavement. We freed ourselves, basically. Okay, it took the government time, the government Lincoln time, to write the papers, but we were doing it with our own determination, our own will, and our own mind. The Union commanders began accepting fugitive slaves as contraband of war, first to use as laborers, then as soldiers. By war's end, nearly 200,000 black men served in the Union Army and Navy, tipping the military balance and transforming the war into a war for freedom. Emancipate, because it was a war to maintain the Union at first in 1861, but by the end of the war, it was to liberate people of African descent, and it was because of the action of these black men who fought in every major battles. I don't know how many Civil War battles have you seen in growing up. I grew up seeing nothing but white men fighting each other in the Civil War. I saw nobody that looked like me until Glory, I think, back in the 80s, you know, with Denzel Washington. okay, to fight in the 54th. But we did fight in every major battle. Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the 13th Amendment in 1865 formally abolished slavery. I question the 1863 thing, but that's what people say. But again, he was writing in 1935 when he wrote this. But DuBois insisted enslaved people were agents of their own liberation, not passive recipients. Let's get that straight. Again, purpose of the Umoja Circle to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce fact, and that is fact, where we find that people are working on fiction. And that's what that's what's rolling around in many people's heads right now, the fiction that we was waiting for white people to free us. No, we freed ourselves. We were human beings, no different than the white man next to us. We saw ourselves just as equal to them. The law might not say that, but we said it in our actions and how we function and how we fought to free ourselves. Let's go on to the next. And here's some images of black men in their uniforms from the Civil War period of time. We fought for our own freedom. Let's make that straight. Here's some more images. You know, we had rank, okay? We were proud. We fought. We knew what we were fighting for. Let's go on to the next. Okay, the Presidential Reconstruction and Black Organizing, 1865 to 1867. This is the beginning of what was called the Reconstruction era. Okay, and of course Lincoln was killed in April of 1865, and this racist white man. You think the person in office now is racist? Andrew Johnson was just as racist. He would use the N-word when he described us, and he was more sympathizer to the South than he was to the radical Republicans. That's why they attempted to impeach him, because he fought tooth and nail for any of these things that these radical Republicans were trying to push forth. He fought against the 13th Amendment. Okay, he fought against any of the Reconstruction thing that brought black people into the society. He was more for the South, separating us. Andrew Johnson implemented lenient presidential reconstructions, pardons Confederates, allowed black codes that re-enslaved freed people in all but name. This is what we had to deal with after the death of Lincoln. Okay, I'm going to stop here and continue on in the next show on this thing. Let's put that image back. I want to talk about the last 2 points. Okay, you know, but black community organized, free people convention demanded for land, the 40 acres and the mules. This is the thing we did. We talked about education. We talked about voting rights. And the full citizenship was part of our dialogue during that period of time, in spite of Andrew Johnson. The Freedom Bureau assisted us with labor contracts, schools, and release, but Congress blocked land redistribution. Free people were forced into sharecropping and the exploitative labor contract. This is what I was talking about, white backlash. Okay, there was an attempt to heal 246 years of enslavement and free labor, non-compensated labor, and over again, white America always, just like today, tried to deconstruct what we have put together with all that. But we'll continue this in the next show. So until next time, I'd like to say peace, hotep, bye-bye.